listeners. It's October 18th, 2024, and you're turned in to Voice Over Work, an audiobook sampler. Where do you listen? I'm your host, Russell, bringing you today's episode, The Hidden Cost of Money, How Money Shapes Our Lives and World by Seb Bunney, chapter by chapter preview. Are you tired of feeling like you're always struggling financially? In this book, Sebastian addresses the issues of how money secretly controls our lives. We'll talk about the history of money, inflation, and even how money is hurting the planet. You can find this book on Amazon. The audiobook is on Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. And be sure to check out the author's website at bit.ly/SebMoney. Now, let's get into the episode. Chapter 1. A Brief History of Money. How Intervention Has Shaped the Money We Use. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Mark Twain. Consider David, a passionate individual who consistently directs his savings toward acquiring outdoor gear, such as camping equipment. The farmer whose livelihood is transformed by an unprecedented surge in demand for ethically sourced, locally produced, grass-fed beef. A boycott where conscientious consumers unite in their refusal to support manufacturers that disregard ethical practices, or a nation whose economy plummets due to a global rejection of natural resources extracted under inhumane conditions. In each of these scenarios, what valuable insights can we gain from analyzing the money flow, or lack thereof? By monitoring the movement of money, be it on an individual or macroeconomic level, we can uncover profound insights into the underlying values driving personal expenditure, or in a broader context, our shared societal values. Take, for example, David's spending habits, which reveal his deep appreciation for nature and the outdoors. Similarly, the surging demand for grass-fed beef not only reflects changing dietary preferences, but also underscores the growing significance of ethical, locally sourced products. However, this revelation comes with a crucial caveat. Only under specific monetary conditions can money truly serve as an authentic reflection of who we are, our unwavering priorities, and the very essence of what we hold dear. When it comes to romantic relationships, no matter how much time or effort we invest, without establishing effective lines of communication, our understanding of our partner's needs becomes distorted, and vice versa. This breakdown in comprehension ultimately dooms the connection, as we lack the capacity to discern the necessary steps for progress. That said, just as how a breakdown in communication can spell the end of a relationship, numerous societal challenges arise when an ineffective monetary system impedes our ability to convey our needs and values. Open lines of monetary communication mean we can allocate our capital according to our beliefs. When declining purchasing power, capital controls, spending limits, or purchasing restrictions hinder our capacity to direct capital where we see fit, money's ability to mirror our societal values begins to erode. Under such circumstances, our capacity to express ourselves monetarily becomes inhibited, suppressing the truth. Consequently, the economy experiences cascading effects, including loss of authenticity, wealth inequality, needless consumption, and environmental degradation, among others. Much like how emotional expression is integral to emotional maturity, freedom of monetary expression is vital for a sustainable and functioning economy. For both relationships and societies to endure. Chapter 2. The Hidden Costs of Intervention. why meddling has led to a decrease in purchasing power. Inflation is when you pay $15 for the $10 haircut you used to get for $5 when you had hair. Sam Ewing. In the span of a single century, our purchasing power has dwindled by a staggering 96%. See Figure 2.1. The stark reality is that $100 today buys what $3.34 would have purchased a century ago. However, it's important to note that this loss in purchasing power didn't simply disappear. Instead, it shifted into the hands of the government and the banks, those with the means to create money, granting them unrestricted control over its use. The loss of purchasing power has created a formidable obstacle, making it increasingly harder for individuals to meet their basic needs, especially those shouldering the responsibility of caring for their children. Are you feeling mounting pressure as gasoline and grocery prices soar unabated? Is the possibility of owning a home becoming an unattainable dream unless it is bestowed upon you through inheritance or unwavering familial support? And if home ownership isn't even on your radar, have you felt the weight of exorbitant rent relentlessly squeezing your wallet? Or perhaps you or your friends have been forced to uproot your lives due to rent hikes, leaving you scrambling to find an affordable place to live? These examples epitomize the insidious impact of inflation, a force that continually chips away at our ability to secure a sustainable income without sacrificing precious time and compromising our overall well-being. Upon examining Figure 2.1, one might be inclined to think, I earn far more than anyone did in 1913. Surely rising wages compensate for the decline in purchasing power. Unfortunately, the reality is not as straightforward. As we will delve into, wages have failed to keep pace with the soaring prices, and every year that our wage growth falls behind inflation, we're essentially experiencing a pay cut. If our employers were to openly declare a wage reduction each year, we would likely strike, revolt, or protest. Yet the subtle erosion caused by inflation goes largely unnoticed. This raises the question, what is it about our present-day monetary system that impairs our purchasing power? Before diving into the nitty-gritty, let's first connect the dots between rising prices, inflation, and central banking. As we have all experienced, inflation is a general price increase resulting in a currency's purchasing power falling. But let us dispel the notion that this deterioration is a mere coincidence or an inevitable force of nature. The truth is that the rise in prices is not arbitrary. It is a direct consequence of deliberate actions. When the money supply expands, when more currency enters the market, excess dollars compete for the finite quantity of goods available, and prices. Chapter 3. The 4 Stages of Economic Ruin. Why Central Planning Often Leads Us Astray. If you do not change direction, you may end up where you are heading. Lao Tzu. Many people hold the belief that if we can only create more money, ensure we elect good people with good intentions, and spend this money on good things, then everything will be hunky-dory. But what if 3 goods don't make a right? What if this belief is a fallacy? And what if we are actually setting ourselves up for failure? With this in mind, let's explore the path to economic ruin. As emphasized in the preceding chapter, our societal framework operates on the foundation of trust. To participate in our existing economic structures, we rely only on the assurance that central bankers not only prioritize the welfare of the people, but also possess the expertise and insight to make well-informed choices that yield the desired outcomes. Yet by placing unwavering trust in these public officials, we inadvertently disregard a fundamental principle of capitalism, its inherent reliance on decentralized decision-making, where economic choices are made by a multitude of individuals and businesses based on their own knowledge and preferences. In capitalism, prices emerge and decisions are made from a competitive, free market environment encompassing the population's vast and diverse tastes and preferences. This decentralized approach allows for a dynamic and adaptive economic system that responds to the ever-changing needs of society. Disclaimer: capitalism can often evoke strong reactions. If you are uncertain whether capitalism deserves a seat at the table that is our global economy, feel free to read over Chapter 14 for a more in-depth exploration of the topic. Central planners, therefore, have the impossible task of gathering all the information needed to make accurate and informed decisions about our ever-changing, complex, and chaotic economy in an attempt to provide value that purportedly exceeds what the free market can deliver. Combining poorly informed decisions and a manipulable monetary system exposes us to the temptation of easy money and debt arising from short-term reactionary measures to alleviate immediate challenges. The downfall of interventionist central planning becomes apparent in what I call the 4 stages of economic ruin. 1. Misalignment to reality. 2. The death of creative destruction. 3. Capital flow distortion. 4. Decision-making impairment. Let's explore each one of these separately. Stage 1. Misalignment to reality. Have you ever tried to help a co-worker with a complex task, only to offer solutions that are irrelevant to the challenges they face? In doing so, you inadvertently add to their confusion and hinder their progress, despite your good intentions. I know I have. This is a misalignment to reality on a personal level, where we misinterpret what our co-worker truly needs and unintentionally work. Chapter 4. The link between money and behavior. How our money shapes how we act. Whenever we seek to avoid the responsibility for our own behavior, we do so by attempting to give that responsibility to some other individual or organization or entity. But this means we then give away our power to that entity, be it fate or society or the government or the corporation or our boss. M. Scott Peck, The Road Less Traveled. Financiers would benefit at the expense of widows and orphans. Wealth would be redistributed from savers to borrowers. Creditors would be inadequately compensated for risk. Too much borrowing would take place. Money would flow abroad in search of higher returns. Asset price inflation would make the rich richer. The reduction of interest rates wouldn't revive a moribund, approaching death economy. In short, forced reduction in interest rates imparts no benefit to a society. These are the words of John Locke, a leading 16th century philosopher and political theorist, from the book The Price of Time by Edward Chancellor. And this quote perfectly underscores that the idea of monetary manipulation leading to a whole host of issues is not a new concept. Many people throughout the ages have warned of the effects of monetary intervention. That said, given the complexity of the financial system and, until recently, the limited literature surrounding the subject, this knowledge has only just started to trickle down into mainstream resources accessible to the general public. Side note, I find it fascinating that Locke's understanding of how a system that inhibits monetary expression ripples throughout society is as accurate today as it was in his day over 400 years ago. With the notion of financial intervention bringing about change being front of mind, let's take a look at how our monetary environment affects our behavior, as this will assist us in building a solid foundation for understanding how money, in its current form, weaves its influence into areas such as government and politics, parenting, business, and our natural environment. Money's effect on behavior. In the old nature versus nurture debate, some argue that conditions such as ADHD, depression, anxiety, and obesity, among others, are a product of nature. They're simply a result of our genetics. However, work by doctors such as Gabor Mate or trauma specialists like John Bradshaw increasingly suggest that these conditions are, instead, a byproduct of our environment. When people are exposed to certain environments, they have a higher propensity for certain outcomes. Said differently, these conditions are largely, in part, coping mechanisms developed during childhood. Imagine a situation where your parents could not provide a nurturing space for your upbringing, where your environment lacked safety and security. In such a circumstance, as a child, you may have frequently found yourself in uneasy situations, triggering your natural... Chapter 5. Money, Parenthood, and Self-Identity. How money influences the family unit. Don't limit your challenges. Challenge your limits. Jerry Dunn. The parent-child bond is one of the fundamental necessities of human life. It is natural and intrinsic, and because of that, we might want to believe that it is immune to the potent effects of money. But not only is this bond far from exempt from the far reaches of our monetary system, but it is also arguably one of the most critical areas impacted. Understanding how the foundational relationship between parent and child is shaped by money will also help illuminate how other areas of life are similarly transformed. As we will discuss, our identity, social aptitude, emotional strength, and physical well-being are largely shaped by our experiences from conception through birth and during our formative years. If our parents faced substantial stress, financial or otherwise, during pregnancy, or if they were unable to provide the necessary emotional support during these crucial stages of development due to work demands or other factors, it can have lasting effects. This can manifest as impaired social skills, weakened immune system, hindered growth, and a range of other related byproducts. With this in mind, before we can fully understand the critical connection between money, parenthood, and our sense of self, we must wrap our heads around the effects of parental stress during pregnancy and the significance of attachment. These two factors greatly shape our personal development and contribute to our overall identity. For those unfamiliar with the term parent-child bond, beyond the immediate bond between mother and child during pregnancy, the parent-child relationship extends to encompass the interaction between a child and their caregivers. These caregivers play a vital role in supporting and nurturing the child's physical, emotional, and social development, which form the bedrock of their personality, life decisions, and overall behavior. How prenatal experiences shape development. In situations of heightened stress, our bodies release hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, triggering a physiological response to potential threats. These stress hormones are also shared with the developing fetus during pregnancy. In her insightful book, Nurturing Resilience, Kathy Kane elucidates the potential repercussions of continuous maternal stress during gestation, saying, if the mother experiences constant stress, these usually helpful hormones can instead have a negative impact on the development of the fetus. Extensive research has linked maternal stress to long-term effects on a child's development, including brain development, allergies, asthma, and restricted fetal blood flow. Moreover, maternal stress increases the secretion of corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH, which can lead to a heightened threat response system in the developing fetus. Our innate threat response systems, fight, flight, and freeze, evolve. Chapter 6. Mismanagement, Irresponsibility, and Risk-Taking. How Easy Money Disrupts Business. The most important thing to remember is that inflation is not an act of God, that inflation is not a catastrophe of the elements or a disease that comes like the plague. Inflation is a policy. Ludwig von Mises. When capital is abundant, such as when debt is cheap because interest rates are low, individuals, governments, and businesses become less conscientious about where they direct their funds. This is a problem. In a world of never-ending monetary expansion, the need to productively allocate capital declines, leading to a vicious cycle of misallocation. As a result, our productive capacity becomes consumed by ever-increasing debt service payments, with far-reaching consequences for our economy. In this chapter, we will explore how our current monetary system disrupts the natural functioning of businesses, beginning with its impact on innovation. Innovation suppression. The term zombie company may sound like something from a horror movie, but it's a very real phenomenon in the business world. A zombie company is a business that cannot support itself financially, but continues to operate through debt accumulation. These still functioning but debt-dependent businesses play a critical role in disrupting the natural flow of capital. A lack of financial viability in a company often indicates that its product or service fails to generate sufficient revenue to cover operational expenses, or that the company has been financially irresponsible, rendering it unable to meet its debt obligations. In a free market, such a business must either restructure or close up shop. However, when the government intervenes to make it cheaper and more accessible for companies to borrow capital, the number of these zombie companies in our economy increases. This propping up of unsustainable companies prevents or postpones the natural life cycle of a business from playing out. New businesses must now compete with an ever-increasing number of zombie companies, making it ever more challenging for these up-and-coming businesses to succeed and prosper. Instead of focusing on innovation, these businesses must use a portion of their resources to compete with companies that should not exist. What's more, in the U.S., the prevalence of zombie companies is only increasing, with their presence in almost every sector. In July 2020, a staggering 19% of all publicly listed U.S. companies were considered zombie companies, indicating a significant disruption in the natural flow of capital. The trend is even more pronounced when we examine the Russell 2000, a U.S. exchange-traded fund that tracks 2,000 small-cap companies, a company valued between $300 million and $2 billion. Over the past decade, the number of unprofitable companies in the Russell 2000 has swelled 8-fold. We must ask ourselves, when the government steps in by directly bailing out fiscal irresponsibility or suppresses interest rates, indirectly supporting such companies to continue functioning, what message does... Chapter 7. Short-term thinking equals long-term problems. How our money impacts government and politics. As soon as you allow politicians to determine that which is bought or sold, the first thing bought and sold will always be politicians. El gato malo, gato's law. As the saying goes, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Nowhere is this more evident than in the realm of government. Elected officials often promise one thing on the campaign trail, only to do something entirely different once they are in office. This necessitates the question, how can we ensure that those in power remain accountable to the citizens they represent? According to Jörg Guido Hülsmann, a German-born economist, the key is to make the government financially dependent on its citizens, which addresses the fundamental political problem of controlling the people in office once they are there. However, with the government's ability to print unlimited amounts of money, our current monetary system has seemingly no government dependence on its citizens. As a result, the balance of power has shifted away from the people and towards those in positions of power. With a system that allows the government to go into debt and access capital without limit, we have created a system where the government's ability to spend is more dependent on imaginative financial intervention to avoid collapse than on the taxpayers themselves. As the great economist Friedrich Hayek predicted, people would seek security instead of independence under a central planning regime. This warning rings true in the current state of Western democracy. In theory, democracy is meant to represent the will of the people, with elected individuals making decisions as such. However, problems arise when money and politics become intertwined, causing values to become skewed and short-term thinking to prevail. In today's context, there appears to be a greater emphasis on virtue signaling rather than actual implementation of meaningful change. While our currency has managed to maintain some degree of value, albeit deteriorating, since departing from the gold standard, the ongoing use of monetary intervention raises concerns about the long-term viability of our political system. Worldwide, we have seen declines in essential democratic functions. Figure 7.1. With this in mind, let's investigate the relationship between money, government, and politics. In our current state-controlled, growth-oriented economy, intervention is a necessity to keep the system alive. However, as we've discussed, over time this approach leads to a devaluation of our currency, worsens wealth inequality, and puts the stability of our economy at risk through mounting debt. On the governmental and political side of things, these effects are noticeable in several ways. First, the populace, feeling the heat of economic hardship, is incentivized to vote for immediate relief rather than Chapter 8. Money's Toll on Our Planet. How monetary policy is amplifying environmental destruction. If you think the economy is more important than the environment, try holding your breath while counting your money. Guy McPherson. Humans, in our current form, have roamed this planet for around 300,000 years. If we condense human history into a full-length 2-hour movie, each minute will represent 2,500 years of history. Isn't it astounding to consider how far we've come? Now, take a guess at when the introduction of modern-day central banking would appear in such a film. Given that the Federal Reserve Act was signed in 1913, it would appear in the last 3 seconds of the movie. What's more, The transition off the gold standard would be a mere 1 second from the end. Yet the implications of these events have already altered the course of humanity and have had a profound impact on the parent-child bond, our businesses, our governments, and our politics. Therefore, in an era where fiat money reigns supreme, we must ask ourselves, what is the cost such money imposes on our planet? Our existing monetary system propels us toward a precarious future, characterized by rapid resource extraction and consumption. As we tirelessly strive to outpace inflation and relentlessly pursue economic growth, we are unwittingly creating a wake of environmental devastation. This unrelenting exploitation depletes the very resources that form the bedrock of life itself, casting a shadow on the sustainability of our existence. In this chapter, we'll explore the effects that our financial system has had on our planet. In 2022, Earth.org, a global environmental movement championing sustainable economic policy, identified the following issues as among the most pressing and critical. Some 1.3 billion tons of food meant for human consumption, a third of the total produced, is wasted. In 1950, the annual global production of plastic was around 2 million tons. By 2015, that number had increased to 419 million tons. Most of it is not recycled, and much of it cannot be sustainably repurposed. Every hour, forests the size of 300 football fields are logged. Globally, more than 68 billion tons of topsoil are lost each year. That is 100 times more quickly than it is naturally replaced. According to the UN Environment Program, textile dyeing in the fashion industry alone is responsible for over 20% of the world's wastewater, or around 93 billion cubic meters. This is on top of the 92 million tons of textile waste annually. The above-mentioned issues result from unbridled consumerism, devastating our planet and its natural resources. But what do all of these have to do with our monetary system? Money. Chapter 9. The hypnotic trance of mass formation. How controlling structures use psychology to command change. From the totalitarian point of view, history is something to be created rather than learned. George Orwell. In a world built upon perpetual growth, where governments frequently encounter economic challenges and environmental issues, policies of intervention and financial manipulation have become the go-to means for effecting change. However, as we have come to realize, this approach is unsustainable and merely conceals the underlying problems. With the increasing number of economic crises and concerns, those in power must now take bold actions to avert collapse and ensure the continued functioning of the system. With this in mind, don't be fooled by the notion that totalitarian structures are solely the product of evil individuals. Rather, they often stem from well-intentioned ideologies and the belief that their actions are for the greater good of humanity, even if it means sacrificing individual rights and freedoms. When we discuss oppressive structures, I refer to the concepts of authoritarianism and totalitarianism. While both systems entail centralized control and restricted individual freedoms, authoritarianism generally allows for certain levels of social, political, and economic autonomy. In contrast, totalitarianism aims to suppress dissent and exert dominance over most, if not all, aspects of society. In this chapter, we will discover how oppressive structures are prone to arise when society is breaking down. As discussed in Chapter 5, our inherent evolutionary need for connection and attachment is crucial for our survival. However, this desire for belonging can also make us susceptible to external influences. When we experience emotions like loneliness, meaninglessness, anxiety, or frustration, we naturally seek solace and support from others. This yearning for connection and guidance can sometimes lead us to place trust and authority in controlling entities. On a personal level, this can manifest as entering into relationships with controlling and abusive partners, or becoming involved with cult-like organizations. Initially, these individuals or groups may appear to offer kindness, understanding, and assistance, but unfortunately, their hierarchical and domineering nature often prioritizes their own interests rather than our well-being. This pattern is mirrored on a larger scale with totalitarian governments as well. That said, these oppressive regimes don't just materialize out of thin air. They require the appearance of backing from the majority of the population. With this support, these regimes can carry out transformative actions that enable them to advance down the path of greater control and authority. This widespread support is often referred to as a mass formation. Only through understanding mass formation can we piece together the rise of totalitarian structures. This exploration in mass formation will also provide a deep... Chapter 10. The Illusion of Freedom. How Unsustainable Systems Erode Our Rights and Freedoms. The ideal subject of totalitarianism is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, i.e., the reality of experience, and the distinction between true and false, i.e., the standards of thought, no longer exist. Hannah Arendt. When an unsustainable system is under immense pressure to maintain economic growth, those in positions of power need to respond with ever greater measures to keep reality from emerging. As a result, rights, freedoms, and values get pushed to the wayside as the primary focus is to determine how to direct the nation's productive capacity toward prolonging the inevitable collapse. In this context, totalitarian controlling structures may be tempting or even necessary to maintain the illusion of security. As these increasingly stringent structures scramble to prolong the inevitable collapse, they will take advantage of economic, national, and international events as a means to implement greater controls. Furthermore, anything to be perceived as obstructing the system's ability to grow is perceived as a threat and painted as the enemy. For Stalin, that enemy was the West and capitalism, as they exposed the failures of communism. For Hitler, that enemy was the Jewish population, as they supposedly betrayed Germany, causing the loss of World War I. For Kim Jong-un of North Korea, the enemy is the United States. For Christianity in the early 15th century, that enemy was the printing press, as it granted individuals the power to access and interpret the Bible on their own terms. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, that enemy was, and still is, anyone questioning the official narrative as they attempted to shine a light on failures in response to the pandemic. As Adam Curtis succinctly sums it up in his documentary series, The Power of Nightmares, in an age when all the grand ideas have lost credibility, fear of a phantom enemy is all the politicians have left to maintain their power. In a state of fear, we often regress to a more primal mindset, driven primarily by our emotions. During such times, We find ourselves in need of guidance and support as we navigate the complexities of decision-making. It is precisely in these moments that these controlling structures can seize the opportunity to present themselves as a perceived source of direction and stability. The problem? Totalitarian and controlling structures rarely serve the interests of the people. Instead, they prioritize the sustainability of the system. In saying that, it's important to note that the suppressive actions taken by these structures are often not deliberately oppressive. Rather, they are seen as necessary when motivated by fear. Those in positions of power may not even be aware that the system is unsustainable or collapsing. They may be simply responding to the symptoms of the problem without recognizing the root cause. This prompts the question, is our current system at risk? Chapter 11, Behind Closed Doors. How Unelected Organizations Govern Global Finance. In the long run, paper money must either collapse in hyperinflation or force the government to adopt a policy of increasing control, and, eventually, total control over all economic resources. Both scenarios entail economic disruptions on a scale that we can barely imagine today. George Guido Hulsmann, The Ethics of Money Production. As economic events increasingly ravage the world, central banks are lavishing in the limelight. However, this isn't without cost. As we will explore, with the oversight and control of central banks growing by the year, there's a corresponding rise in the influence and capital flows directed towards unelected institutions that operate behind closed doors and wield incomprehensible authority. Under the pursuit of unsustainable, endless economic growth, immense power is placed in the hands of these soon-to-be-discussed institutions, all in an attempt to maintain the status quo of continued expansion regardless of the limiting factors of reality. In the previous chapter, we explored how this power dynamic has led to those in the position of power slowly infringing upon the rights and freedoms of its populace. However, this infringement extends far beyond the borders of any single country, with smaller nations often finding themselves subject to the will of larger, more powerful ones. In this chapter, we will examine 3 such examples where our monetary systems have enabled not only the emergence of controlling structures on the personal level of citizens, but also on a nation-state level. To this end, we will investigate 1. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. 2. The relationship between the French Treasury and the Central African Franc, CFA. 3. The Bank of International Settlements. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF. In 1944, at the tail end of World War II, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund were established by 44 founding member countries to create a framework for international economic cooperation and to reduce poverty worldwide. On the surface, these appear to be noble causes with the potential to bring immense benefits. However, the reality is far from what was promised. In his thought-provoking article, Structural Adjustment, Alex Gladstein, Chief Strategy Officer at the Human Rights Foundation, sheds light on how the IMF oppressed emerging nations and channeled their resources to richer ones. Although the IMF and World Bank purport to foster sustainable economic growth, promote higher standards of living, and reduce poverty, rather than supporting the local populations they claim to help, the infrastructure funded by these entities often serves to facilitate wealth and resource extraction. As a result, the well-being of local habitats and communities is often ignored in favor of corporate interests. As we will explore, when the IMF steps in to aid underprivileged nations. Chapter 12. Realigning Incentives. What a monetary system built on truth may look like. There are two types of healing, whether it is physical healing or otherwise. One is removal of cause, which is good. The other is removal of symptom, which merely postpones the reckoning. Peace Pilgrim. It may be a cliché, but more often than not, a problem is simply an opportunity in disguise. But how can we seize this opportunity if we can't accurately identify the problem? Achieving true healing, whether mental, physical, emotional, or economic, requires seeing reality as it is. Focusing on immediate needs without looking to the root of the issue only masks the underlying problems, allowing them to fester. Up until this point, I've done my best to paint an unvarnished picture of the world we live in. However, considering the weightiness of the topics we've explored, I am wary that it can be easy to fall into a cycle of despair. So let's take a break from the side effects or symptoms of a misaligned monetary system and go back to the drawing board. How do we build a new system from the ground up? One that realigns incentives and promotes truth, integrity, and freedom of expression. In crafting such a proposal, I will employ a first principles approach, deconstructing the complex problems we've encountered into fundamental truths and devising solutions rooted in this newfound understanding. Realigning incentives. In theorizing a better system, I must build from some precepts that I hold true. First among them is an acknowledgement that value is subjective. What one person values, another person may not. Value is based on an individual's perception, needs, and preferences. It is shaped by personal experiences, cultural norms, beliefs, and social influences. You've probably noticed that your own values change over time based on how your shifting circumstances and experiences shape your attitude. You may learn new information or develop new attachments that shift your priorities and therefore your sense of value. This subjectivity makes it difficult to determine any objective measure of value and highlights the importance of individual freedom in determining what is valuable to each person. Along these same lines, my views, values, and beliefs may not always or even often align with the majority. The same is true for all people, and therefore also true for those in positions of power. With this complexity in mind, I've asked myself, what does a monetary system look like that allows for freedom of expression and enables the varied values of the populace to shine through? In our present system, where expression is impeded, there's no way to disseminate fact from fiction. Even if those in power have the population's best interests at heart, we still face two significant challenges. One, our economy is one of the most complex, multifaceted systems in existence. To accurately assess what is needed, with limited human biases, and Chapter 13, Money Reimagined. How this revamped monetary system may benefit us. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the United States. Money has a profound impact on every aspect of our lives, from the choices we make as consumers to how our governments function, the way businesses operate, and how families interact. Our money shapes our world in ways we may not even realize. So, what happens when money is redesigned to better align with our values and priorities? This chapter will explore the far-reaching effects of our reimagined money, discussed in the previous chapter, on our environment, government and politics, wealth inequality, businesses, and family units, and delve into the monetary options currently available to us. Let's dive in, starting with how this money may play a hand in reducing wealth inequality. Wealth inequality. Wages have long been stuck in neutral while inflation roars ahead, leaving the majority of people struggling to keep up. Given the stickiness of wages mentioned in Chapter 2, asset prices and the cost of living continue to outpace, driving wealth inequality. But as we mentioned in the previous chapter, if the stickiness of wages held true while our purchasing power increased over time, the tide would turn in favor of wage earners. As our currency strengthens, wages may decline but lag behind deflation, transferring wealth toward the currency holders and those who work for a living. And with the power of a unified currency and seamless transactions, why settle for paying someone in a developed country far more than someone of equal caliber abroad? A decentralized, unified currency with near instantaneous settlement and minimal transaction fees creates a natural leveler. In such a scenario, money will flow to developing countries, but not just any money. Money far superior to their local fiat currency, which is prone to debasement. This means over time, these individuals who are currently at the whim of overreaching governments will have a method to opt into a much more beneficial system. What about the affordability of housing and other financial assets? Chapter 3 exposes the harsh reality that our monetary system does not align with our deflationary world, where technological progress is growing at a rapid clip. This advancement leads to price declines, but unfortunately these declines are never realized due to the interventionist monetary practices and inefficient capital allocation. As a result, many people pursue ownership of assets that offer scarcity. Chapter 14, Rebutting Mainstream Beliefs. Why capitalism isn't the problem, and regulation or taxation are not the answer. Democracy and socialism have nothing in common but one word, equality. But notice the difference. While democracy seeks equality in liberty, socialism seeks equality in restraint and servitude. Alexis de Tocqueville. When I was a little whippersnapper growing up in New Zealand, I had my eye on a scooter at the local toy store. I thought, if I could just get that scooter, it would fix all of life's problems. After 3 endless months of diligent saving, I finally had saved enough. I wandered down to the store with my father and 2 brothers, and, following much deliberation over which color to go for, I had made up my mind. As we walked up to the till, my excitement quickly turned to disappointment when my dad suggested it was unfair that I was to get a scooter while my brothers went without. But by the time we left the store, I had paid for my scooter, while my dad had purchased one for each of my brothers. Despite finally having the scooter I longed for, I felt bitter and disillusioned. I left the store that day with a sour taste in my mouth. Although my father claimed this was in the name of fairness, the world felt unfair to me. What about all the extra chores I had shouldered, the candy I had sacrificed, and the energy I had dedicated to saving up for that scooter? I thought to myself. My brothers hadn't contributed anything, yet they enjoyed all the candy and the ultimate reward of the scooter. This unfairness weighed heavily on me, creating immense resentment in my young mind. Looking back, what I find fascinating is that this experience may have unknowingly been the catalyst that sparked my interest in monetary intervention, starting the journey that led me here, writing this book. If I took one thing from this experience, it is that monetary intervention misaligns incentives. When people receive money through channels outside the traditional realms of work or trade, it severs the link between the act of work and the pursuit of what we desire. This can lead to disastrous consequences, such as normalizing the exploitation of others' labor for personal gain. This is true whether we're talking about a child's allowance, a government stimulus package, or a housing subsidy. But of course, not everyone sees things this way. For example, my brothers lean towards a socialist approach to society, strongly supporting government intervention. I wonder why. They might argue that the problems we face are not the result of government overreach, but rather 1. Unregulated capitalism, 2. Insufficient regulation, 3. Inadequate taxation, 4. Or lack of social support from the welfare state. While I respect that everyone is entitled to their own beliefs, I'd like to push back on these 4 common left-leaning beliefs to round out this book. Capitalism. Preface. I grew up in what I believe to be a typical household. When I was 5 years old, my parents separated as they found themselves no longer meeting each other's needs. Following the separation, my mother, in search of happiness and a new start, moved my 2 brothers and me halfway across the world. Not once, but twice. As we navigated this challenging time, I unknowingly took on the role of my mother's emotional support, regularly prioritizing her needs above my own. Throughout this period, my connection with my father was sporadic at best, and to compound matters, we struggled to see eye to eye. I frequently felt brushed aside when I brought up my passions and pursuits, as they largely didn't align with my father's values of academia and financial security. It was disheartening to feel like my dreams weren't taken seriously, and I frequently questioned whether I was on the right path. I longed for the kind of fatherly support I saw in other families, but the reality of our relationship often fell short. That said, I was incredibly fortunate to have a supportive mother, one who actively promoted my love for sports and assisted me when I wanted to leave traditional schooling to pursue a career in mountain bike coaching. However, her top priority was to put food on the table and a roof over our heads, which didn't always come easily as a single mom, let alone leave much wiggle room for funding non-essentials or quality time for herself or my brothers and me. Between a father who rarely endorsed my love for the outdoors and a mother desperately trying to get by while caring for 3 children, my developmental years often left me in need of greater support. I didn't know who I was, what my needs were, or how to understand my own emotions. I turned to my peers to fill the gap left by my parents, but as a result, I learned to suppress how I felt in an effort to conform and fit in. But I did not give up striving to find my authentic self, my personality, values, and spirit, regardless of the external pressures to act otherwise. Looking back, I feel incredibly fortunate to have had the childhood I did. My brothers and I had food on the table, clothes on our backs, and a roof over our heads. We were safe and cared for, But as I grew into young adulthood, I couldn't help wondering how the particulars of my upbringing had shaped me. Following a challenging breakup and 23 years of looking outward in an attempt to fit in and meet the needs of others, I was in a difficult emotional state. It was at this moment that I finally set out to answer some burning questions. Who am I? What are my needs and boundaries? How can I explore my authentic self without a sense of shame? As I struggled to answer these questions, I realized that many of my peers, from a range of backgrounds, were facing similar crises of identity. I began to question whether, rather than an individual issue as I had originally assumed, there was a larger impediment to living authentically. It wasn't until I started to wonder what was behind this. All right, folks, that's a wrap on our chapter-by-chapter preview onto The Hidden Costs of Money by Seb Bunney. We've covered a lot of ground, from the history of money to its current impact on our lives. The bottom line is, understanding how money works is like having a secret superpower. It empowers you to make smarter financial choices and even advocate for a fairer system. So if you want to level up your financial game, be sure to check out the entire book by Seb Bunney, The Hidden Cost of Money. It's on Amazon, and the audiobook, narrated by myself, is available on Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. Check out the author's website at bit.ly/SebBunney, and check out our website at newtonmg.com for more info.